I want to thank you for coming here. My name is Mike Stout. I'm the National Director for the Isaac Walton League, lifetime member of the Battle of Homestead Foundation. I think everybody's familiar with both of those groups. And I'd like to thank the other sponsors, the Breathe Project, Food and Water Watch, and also the Homestead United Presbyterian Church. So, thank you. As we always do, when it's time to go, if you want some soul, you got to have music. So this is my prayer. This is dedicated to you folks in East Palestine and the surrounding areas. When you fall in the doggy dog, when looking out for number one won't do, when you're broke at the end of your road, the whole world is caving in on you, I think you need soldiers of solidarity. When you're trapped under attack, when all the vultures are circling over you, when you're in hot, hit bottom rock, the rays of poverty are jerking on you, I think you need soldiers of solidarity. When you're stuck knee-deep in mud, wiped away by a flood or a derailed train, when you've been burned, you ain't nowhere to turn, on the edge of an edge, getting ready to fall, I think you need soldiers of solidarity, not sympathy or charity, but love and solidarity. When all is lost and you've been tossed to the wolves of a system that don't give a damn, the only way we'll live to see a better day, when we band and join forces again. I'm talking about you and me. When you're on strike in the middle of a fight, about to crack, your back's against the wall, when you've been burned, you got nowhere to turn, on the edge of a ledge, getting ready to fall, I think you need soldiers of solidarity, people like you and me, soldiers of solidarity. They rule the seas, they're the powers that be, you'll never beat them alone, you see. The only damn thing that's gonna break these chains is when we band back together again. Talking about you and me in solidarity, you and me in solidarity. When we're standing here together, we can make this world much better. When we're standing here together, we can make this world much better. When we're standing here in love and solidarity, with love and solidarity, with love and solidarity, with love and solidarity. Thank you. Probably sometime about a year ago, maybe it was about 14 or 15 months ago, I started trekking up back and forth to East Palestine. And to put it bluntly, I fell in love with the people in that town, the activists in that town. And the reason I fell in love with the activists in that town is because I've never seen people that have been beaten down so bad, that have been screwed so bad, that have been abandoned and betrayed like they have, and yet they still stand up and not only fight for themselves and their family, but fight for their community. Those are my kind of people. And in the process, I met a young man. He claims to be a wise elder, but he's really quite a young man, Mr. George Thompson. George has been a chemist for over 5.5 decades. He has 21 books out. He's been an expert witness in probably, I don't know how many, over 50 cases. And he's the only person that got, let me put it this way, when he saw what happened, he's retired, just like I am. He's been retired for some time. And when he saw East Palestine play out on TV, and he saw the people get told, you can go back to town, everything's okay, everything's safe, everything's clean, he knew something was wrong. And he's the only person that we know of on the planet that went online and pulled the manifest for the Norfolk Southern train that derailed and analyzed it car by car. Not only what was in the cars, but what kind of toxic chemicals were there, what they caused, and especially what happens when they all get combined and set on fire. So with that, I'd like to introduce, he's a very distinguished elder in my eyes, and he's a good friend, Mr. George Thompson.
Good. I recognize a few people here on the front rows that are from the East Palestine area, and welcome back to a repeat. I'm very excited for those of you that are from the Pittsburgh area, because as I was saying before this started, when I first heard about this situation in East Palestine, my concern was for Pittsburgh, because I understood the prevailing winds from East Palestine blew southeast, and you're about 40 miles away. So the concern that I had was that, well, I'm getting ahead of myself already. Can I have the first chart, please? Usually I have them up here and I can run them myself. But I want to explain a little bit to you so that you understand what toxicology is. Toxicology is a very unique science that is a merger of chemistry, medicine and biology, and environmental ecosystems. And so when I look at a situation like East Palestine, I'm looking across all of that. I'm not just looking at the health effects, but I'm looking at what are the chemicals that were involved there, and do they produce the health effects that people are claiming? And when that correlation matches, you can say those chemicals cause those effects, and that's what toxicologists do. And as Mike mentioned, I've been an expert witness on, I think it's up to 56 cases now, and my job is to look at that equation. In some cases, like East Palestine, I'm also looking at the environment, but in many cases I'm not looking at the environment as much because some person is complaining about some personal injury, and I'm trying to see if that matches with what we know about those chemicals. And so the triangle at the bottom of the chemistry, environmental, and medicine, those arrows go both ways. They feed each other. And so if you go to a physician, he's focusing on your symptoms and the biological effects in your body. That's his job. Some of them are highly specialized and some of them are generalized. But it's not their job to know the chemicals. And it's not the physician's job to know the environment. And so I work closely with even more experts in each of those areas, because as a toxicologist, there are always people in chemistry that know more about chemistry than I do, or in medicine that know more about medicine or environment. But none of them can work that triangle in harmony. Next, please. And so early on, as I was trained and grew up in toxicology, the question the motivation was always to stay focused upon making prudent decisions. And the precautionary principle was something that I understood for a long time. That if it was a complex situation, which East Palestine was, then you err on the side of precaution rather than proving the detailed science. There's so many chemicals involved in East Palestine. I can't possibly say what caused this symptom, because there are maybe 100 chemicals that cause that symptom, and I won't be able to identify which one. But mostly in law cases, that's a requirement. You have to specify the chemical that caused that effect. And so the concept here was my background. And I can have the next slide, please. And so, as indicated on this chart, when this incident occurred on the 3rd of February, 2023, I saw it on the news like people all over the country did. And the question that came into my mind, and then I watched this every night on the news, that it was just continuing. And for a week, this stuff burned. And I thought that was pretty unprecedented in my experience, just that observation, that fire went on and on and on and on. But then, on the 8th of February, the evacuation order was lifted. And on the 15th, there was a town hall meeting basically where they said the air, water, and soil was okay, you can go home. As a toxicologist, I knew that couldn't have been true.
Will you turn your head hard to hear you?
Okay, thank you. And so, by the 15th, when they said everything's okay, and that statement was made by the head of the US EPA, I knew that it wasn't based on information. It wasn't based on data. It wasn't based upon science. It was based upon politics. And that bothered me a lot, because my career has always been based on data. In my expert witness cases, sometimes I support the defense and sometimes I support the plaintiffs. It's based upon the data. What does the data say? And so I looked through my experiences, a whole bunch of things that should have been done before that announcement was made. And from what I had in my week of watching things, and up until the 15th when the administrator made that announcement, I didn't know any of those things had been done. But he's saying everything's safe. Next, please. And so basically here, this statement here from the Boston University School of Public Health that I've found only recently, to me fit very much intact. So one of the conspicuous casualties in the war against the toxic chemicals is the public's regard for public health officials. And just to jump to the bottom, the departments of public health have become departments of public reassurance. So you have your politicians and agencies come out and say everything's safe. Don't worry, your homes aren't polluted, your environment's not polluted, and it's all supposition, not data. And the irony is, now that I've learned, is that during this same time, people all over the area were sick. Animals were dying. 43,000 animals died in the streams that run through the center of East Palestine. Fish, crayfish, frogs, they became sterile. But everything's safe. There's nothing to worry about. And if you aren't familiar with East Palestine, those streams run under houses, under the municipal building. It's very unique. And they were saying that there's no chemicals to worry about in those. Next, please. And so what I did with my suspicion, I went online to Norfolk Southern's website and downloaded their railcar manifest for this train. Their document. And their document included 9 different types of information, some of which may be too small to see. But the key piece of information is over here. They identified the status of each car. They also identified the contents in each car. So I knew whether it was a product or if it was a chemical, and what was the status in this preliminary manifest. And I knew it was preliminary because there were some things that were left blank. but I didn't know how accurate the information was, and I wasn't sure how to interpret some of the things. But in summary, there are 52 train cars in this manifest that were involved in the derailment. Most of the time when I read the media, it's 33. No, it's 52 cars that were involved in that derailment, according to Norfolk Southern, not according to George Thompson, but according to their document. And of those, they claimed over here in the status that 17 of those cars burned. Most times I hear a small, much smaller number in the media. That there were 15 additional cars that were called, in the status column over here, impinged. And I didn't know what that meant. Did they burn or didn't they burn? Does it mean that they were contaminated with smoke from the burning cars? I didn't know. And I researched it to see if I could find out a scientific definition of impinged, and I couldn't that applied to this situation. And so I said, well, I'll just leave it. I'll talk about burned cars and I'll talk about impinged cars, and we'll see where it goes. But today, I went to Ground Zero for the first time today, and was talking to the family that lives probably the closest house, one of the closest houses to it. And she was telling me that her and her husband on the 3rd of February, when they heard the derailment, they started watching the fire from their house. And they stayed up and watched it till midnight. And the train cars were burning all the way from their house clear to the end of the train. There wasn't a mix of burned and impinged and unburned and the way that the manifest said. She said there was just a constant stream of fire, and she showed me a picture of it. It looked like a red lace down that railroad track. And so the point here is that I started with Norfolk Southern's information. Next slide, please. And the first thing that I did, and I see this is getting really too small, but I'll try and make sense of this, is that the first thing I did is look at the rail car contents. What was in the rail cars according to that manifest? Now on this chart, all of this information on this side comes from Norfolk Southern. As a toxicologist, I went into the literature and filled in what's the acute and chronic and environmental hazards from that product or chemical. And that was to evaluate what was the danger of the train itself. And I'll just point out a couple of things. These two, if you can or can't see them, over here they were inert plastic pellets. There's no danger from on those cars, just inert. If I can see it here, and I can't see it very well myself, I think that says semolina flour. When I got to that one, I didn't know what semolina was. I looked it up, and it turns out it's pizza flour. Some special brand of flour used to make pizza. And on the toxicology of semolina, over here, there is a chronic health effect from the flour. Because it's dust. If you spend your career making pizza and inhale enough of that dust, you can develop an allergy to it. And that's the only health effect from semolina. Now, I point these out because I'm going to show you an example later using those same chemicals. Next chart. I won't say a lot about this. Same kind of thing. There were 24 different types of materials, chemicals or products, on the train and in these 52 derailed cars. And the difference in number is that there were multiple numbers of some of these products, multiple cars of some of these products. But I want to come down here and point out that the last one here are frozen vegetables. Whole carload of frozen vegetables. And as a toxicologist with all these years' experience, I said, that's no hazard. I eat them all the time. And so I put over here to be determined, because I hadn't researched the toxicology of them, and I'm sure that as a toxicologist I could find some things that are wrong with things like broccoli and those frozen vegetables that I don't like much. But at this stage, all I documented were the cars that were in and what the rail company said about that particular cars. Next chart, please. The other element that I looked at in toxicology, question is exposures and exposure pathways. In this case, we knew that those fires burned for the better part of a week. So that stuff's going into the air. I could see it every night on TV, and so could you. So I knew that that was one exposure. So back here, starting on the 3rd, but that went for a week. On the 6th is when they decided to drain and ignite the vinyl chloride. And you couldn't see the details, but there were 5 cars of vinyl chloride, about 200,000 pounds in each of those rail cars. So there's 1 million pounds of that one chemical. And vinyl chloride was a concern for 2 reasons to the people on the front lines, including Norfolk Southern. One is it's flammable. 2 is it's carcinogenic. It causes cancer and is known to cause cancer. Their concern with it was that one of the cars was increasing in temperature, and they were afraid it was going to explode and blow shrapnel over a mile radius around the car. And so what they decided was to drain the vinyl chloride. There are ditches running alongside the railroads, and they were going to drain in these ditches and burn them. Nobody asked what happens when you burn vinyl chloride. But that was the way to keep it from exploding. As it turns out, the temperature was not rising in that one car, it was low, it was decreasing. And the NTSB, one of their conclusions when they came and evaluated the situation in East Palestine is that it didn't need to happen. They didn't need to ignite it and cause that massive fire that went on and polluted many states, as you'll see. And so the context here is that those are 2 types of massive exposures. But then, after the 13th, now this is 10 days later, they start digging up the railroad tracks. Railroad company wants to get those trains running again. And they can't get them running until they get all that polluted soil out. And so they pulled up all the ties and they dug out all the soil and they trucked it out of there starting by mid-February. Because their priority was getting the trains running again. Again, by this time, they didn't know anything about the toxicology or the hazards of these chemicals. And the people that they sent to work there were told that there's no concerns, you don't have to wear protective equipment. And I've talked to an individual from Virginia that was contracted to come in and help clean that up, who's died. Nothing he can do about it. He worked for 5 or 6 months there in East Palestine. They told him specifically, EPA told him, that they didn't need personal protective equipment. And the net result is, when I talked to him about a year after the incident, that he was in such bad condition he couldn't work. He'd had a stroke, a heart attack, and his condition was just deteriorating. And so this digging up released the chemicals all over again. And then in 2024, they decided to clean up the streams. These streams that run right through the center of some of the homes and businesses in downtown East Palestine. And the way they were going to clean it up is they were going to blast air into it with such force that it would drive the chemicals out of the soil and particularly out of the residue in the bottom of the streams, the sediment. And so if that worked, where would the chemicals go? Back in the air, under people's homes, in town, and the wind's just going to pick them up and carry them maybe to Pittsburgh. And so here was a whole series, and they're frankly still doing this work, digging up soil and storing up the streams. And every time they do that, they're releasing those very hazardous chemicals all over again. So I lost track. I picked 4 exposure events, but they're probably 20 or 30. Because I don't hear about everyone they're working on. And so the context here is that people weren't just exposed on the 3rd of February. They've been exposed pretty much for the last 2 years. And some of the homes that we've been in and tested, independent testing, have verified that their soil on their property, the air in their homes have hazardous chemicals in it. In September, this past fall, I tested 3 houses myself for a physician in Texas that wanted to get some independent analyses, additional independent analyses. And this week I did 3 more. I just came from this afternoon, and for the first time, I experienced the symptoms that I've heard about for 2 years. I was standing outside of this house that's at ground zero, and she was explaining to me all the pollution in her backyard. She won't even let her kids go down and play in the grass. And about 15 minutes later, I had to grab a hold of my car because I had a dizzy spell. And that's one of the primary symptoms that people complain about. I don't have dizzy spells, but I had one this afternoon, and it was unquestionable. So the point here is that there are multiple releases. Now, the tendency is that you people from Pittsburgh are sitting there talking about the poor people in East Palestine. But those chemicals didn't stay in East Palestine, and you'll see that in a little bit. So when I'm talking about multiple exposures here, those are multiple chemical releases where the predominant wind direction is southeast. And part of the verification is that some of the people living in Darlington, Pennsylvania, were as affected as anybody living in East Palestine, because they happen to be in the wind direction where that blowing. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm just going to show some of these. This is very similar to the picture that I saw today from this woman at the ground zero, except that in her picture, this flame went all the way down the railroad track to the last car. Every car was on fire in her picture. She's sending that to me, and I might very well replace that additional with that. Next, please. Here is the large explosion, if you will, when they ignited. And to me, this is phenomenal because these are very high temperatures here. And the next slide, I don't know. Yeah, this is the one that really grabbed me when I saw this, because what's in this? The blackness, the gray colors, are carbon. It's incomplete combustion. So the chemicals that they were burning didn't completely get consumed in the fire. And I'll show you in a minute what that means. But I knew when I saw that mass that that is unbelievable pollution. And if I haven't said it before to this group, this incident in East Palestine is the worst toxicological contamination incident that I've seen in 55 years of experience. More chemicals, more poundage, the risks associated with it are endless. It's probably going to get into generations of health effects from it. Can I just go back one there? The point that I want to emphasize here is look how close these houses are. It's amazing how close they were to this train. Next, please. This I put in here because one of the things that the manifest was erroneous. Remember, this is a preliminary manifest. But Norfolk Southern said that the rail car that carried these electric vehicles did not burn. This is the evidence they did burn. So that should have been corrected, and in my presentation analysis, it is corrected. But you can see the cars are just charred, all of them. And these have lithium-ion batteries. Coincidentally, at the early stages of this, I was asked to reevaluate the hazards of lithium-ion battery fires. And gave a presentation out in Denver, I think, to an association of scientists about that. So I knew what this meant. And the kinds of chemicals that are released by lithium-ion batteries are highly corrosive. Hydrogen fluoride gas. Hydrogen fluoride is an acid that is so strong it will etch glass. And that's one of the primary products released when you burn lithium-ion batteries. But several other gases as well, not just that one. Next. Okay, Mike referred to this in his presentation, and this was a work of love when the inspiration came to do this, because I looked at every car in the 52 that were in their manifest individually, and I compiled the data that I had discern much of which is in their manifest. By color code here, all of those 17 that they said were burned, I made red. And all those that they said were impinged, even though I didn't know exactly what that meant, I made the golden color. And then, let's see, what have I got here? These purplish ones over here were all malt liquor, and those were not labeled on the manifest. I've since seen pictures to know that all 9 of those cars burned. And so I had to add those products to the ones that I knew came from the fire. And then there were some where there were no comments about the fire status, but others where there were comments but nothing about fire. Well, when I talked to the lady today at Ground Zero, I have a question whether this is really accurate. It was preliminary. I got it shortly after the event, so I don't presume that Norfolk Southern had time by the time I got this to analyze and correct it, etc. But when I went back to see a month later, the middle of March, I went back to get their updated manifest. There's no manifest on Norfolk Southern's website. They removed the one that I had found and hadn't replaced it with a more accurate one. So I've been using this all the way through because when you look at the pounds here, 17 cars, 15 cars, these other cars, the total pounds that were put into that plume is 10 million. What is that number? 300, almost 400,000 pounds. When you see that black plume rising, that's all stuff that's going up in the air. It has to come down. And where's it going to come down? Well, my initial concern was Pittsburgh. You're 40 miles away and you're downwind. Now, do I have data for that? No. Nobody that I know of has tested Pittsburgh. It's not even talked about. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk to you folks. And I'm going to assign you to be missionaries and go out and tell your community that you got a problem that you need to study and evaluate. Next, please. Now, this is the same 24 materials that were on the train, but now, instead of looking at what was in the rail cars, I'm looking at what are the chemicals produced when they were burned, when the contents of the rail cars were burned. And so I've got the first 2 here were those inert plastic pellets. And look at the chemicals that were released. Now that's not going to mean a whole lot to you necessarily unless you're trained in a similar science. But what you will understand are the number of yellows. The number of chemicals that were released by the fire that could cause cancer. So if vinyl chloride was known to cause cancer, and that was one of their big concerns. They needed to burn it. But look what you get when you burn it. You don't just get one cancer-causing chemical, you get multiple. And you have this huge amount of corrosive that's released, which would explain a fair amount of the irritation, the coughing, the headaches, and many of the symptoms that people locally experience. It wasn't appropriate to burn that train. Couldn't have been worse. Next slide. I have 4 pages of this, and I won't go into all of them. Here's semolina, the flour that produced the allergy in pizza makers. But look what you get here. Now, what you can't see probably are all the things I didn't highlight. But you're talking about chemicals that influence the heart and vein system, the brain, the kidneys, essentially every organ system in the body is over here to this part. I highlighted the chemicals, or the carcinogens, because that really bothers people to know that. And we've already had several cancers occur in the East Palestine area that are sort of untoward. We had a man within, I think, a few months develop breast cancer, a man. Now that happens, but pretty rare. And we had one within a few months after. And I think, as I remember, Didn't he have double mastectomy?
Yeah.
So he ended up with the other breast later. And so these are not emotional statements, even though I know they are. They are scientific facts. Remember, the facts over on this side come from the toxicology and medical literature, not my opinion. Okay, next slide. Let's go on down, skip this one, but just notice the number of carcinogens that I've highlighted. Keep going. Okay, I want to look at frozen vegetables. And this doesn't show completely because it goes beyond the chart down here a little bit. But these are the chemicals produced when you burn frozen vegetables. So ladies, be careful when you're cooking them in your house. The same thing happens. You release those chemicals. And it doesn't show all the way down, but these are the same kind of chemicals that are released by the plastics because they have the chemical molecules in them that produce these, what I call forever chemicals. And you'll notice that soot and ash, maybe you didn't notice it before, but soot and ash are on here. Everybody's familiar with that. That's what you saw in the plume. But what people don't realize is that those both by themselves cause cancer. But the worst case is that those microscopic particles of carbon, the millions, perhaps billions of particles that were going up in that plume tower, will have the forever chemicals bind to it. So you have the basic material that can cause cancer, and bound to it are a half a dozen or a dozen other chemicals that cause cancer, maybe different kinds of cancer. And that's what's going up in that plume and then distributing around the area beyond East Palestine. Next slide. So when I compared the two, this column over here are the chemicals that were on the train. This column are the chemicals that were produced by the fire. And if you look here, the numbers, the hazards of the chemicals that were on the train are all single digit. There are 8 chemicals that cause cancer, but chemicals or products that were on the train that cause cancer. But over here, the ones that cause cancer is almost 120. Wasn't smart to burn that. And so, but when you look down, all of these numbers over here, first of all, there's a much longer list over here, but the numbers are all bigger, much bigger. One of the intriguing pieces of information that I uncovered early on in this is that the federal government had workers go in there and check on what's going on, how bad is it. CDC sent a team of workers in there to do their evaluation, the Center for Disease Control. Their team came down with what was called a mystery illness, and they left. I don't think they've ever written a report as to why they left or what the mystery illness was, but they didn't stay once they got sick. These people in East Palestine, Darlington, they lived there. The lady today, when I told her I had a dizzy spell, she says it doesn't affect us because we're used to it. Their bodies have literally accommodated, but that isn't a good thing. Okay, next. Okay, this just illustrates how the stream literally runs through town. There are 2 streams there, and as you can see here, maybe this is a house, and that stream is running right under the house. And there are times when the stream is high, water elevation, it goes into the basements of those homes. Other homes, it's very close, it would go behind it. But this one I put in here specifically because it literally is under the house. And the municipal building, the stream runs right under the municipal building. One of the workers in the building, in the municipal building, told me that when people come in town to pay taxes or do whatever else they do in the municipal building, they cover their faces. The workers couldn't do that. They were in that municipal building all day long. Next. Now, this is my emphasis of the uniqueness and why this is an apocalypse. Is that in my background in toxicology for 50 years, over 50 years, I've studied the hazardous effects of chemicals, one at a time. When I was doing anti-cancer work, I wanted to know what's the toxicology of that one chemical. When I was doing marijuana research, what's the effect of that one chemical that's extracted from marijuana? And all my career, it's been one chemical. But I did work in some companies, like a fragrance or flavor company, where they have mixtures. You women maybe like, some of you like to wear perfumes. Maybe your husbands like you to wear perfumes. That's a combination of about 400 chemicals. Well, in my career, I worked in that company for 8 years, looking at mixture health effects. But in that stage of my career, which was about 15 to 20 years into my career, they didn't have technology to do that. So I had to look one at a time and add up the ones that were the biggest concerns to determine whether that product was safe or not. It was a large part of guessing. Well, I look back now and say the good Lord was training me to look at the mixture problem in East Palestine. There are no standards for looking at mixtures. No health standards exist anywhere. All of the health standards are for individual chemicals. State, federal, anywhere you want to look, international. And so the concern that I realize as a toxicologist is that if I'm breathing the contamination released from that rail car fire, and I don't care if I'm in East Palestine or Pittsburgh or Washington, D.C., if I'm breathing air from that plume, I'm not breathing one chemical. I'm breathing hundreds of chemicals. I've identified probably 200 to 300 chemicals produced by the fires. Those are all released simultaneously. What I don't know from the chemical side is I've listed here a whole bunch of chemicals, but what happens when they interact with each other? These I've identified coming from some of the chemicals and products on the train. But these are in a very reactive circumstance in that plume. They can react to create chemicals that I haven't even imagined. So there could be thousands of chemicals come out of this because of the temperatures and the stirring volume that occurs from that plume. So I have a real concern about this chemical stew. It's almost never talked about. It's always talked about one chemical and it's at a low level. Well, what if I have 100 chemicals that are at a low level? I've got to know what is the impact of the combination, not just the one. Okay, next, please. Early on, I was aware within the first week or two of animal deaths that occurred, particularly following the February 6th detonation. And one of the first ones I learned about were dead chickens. This woman had checked on her chickens the night before she went to bed. I think she had 5, as I remember. And she came out and checked on them the next morning. Not one of them was alive. How'd that happen? She lived northwest of East Palestine, northwest of ground zero, not southeast. And when you look at the list over here, all kinds of different pets. The one that I'm trying to get involved with right now is where they raised purebred dogs. And they had 116 or 119, I forget the number, of puppies that died. They also had a puppy born with 2 heads. And so from toxicology viewpoint, this is a standard principle. My original research was in animals to forecast what I could expect to see in humans, or physicians could expect to see in humans. This is a foretelling of what's going on in the people. So we say that no people died. They didn't, that I know of at the time, but there sure were a lot of animals. Next, please. So I'm going to go through some of these fairly quickly because I just want to show here that one of the primary concerns was irritation and corrosion of skin, eye, nose, throat, and lungs. Many people complain of that. These are the chemicals that I've identified from the fire that cause that series of symptoms. It's not just one. Next, please. Same thing here. I've identified 20 different types of cancer that the chemicals that burn can produce. And the primary thing here is that look at the nose and nasopharynx and lung, which you're going to have when you're breathing these chemicals in. Those tissues are going to be exposed, but look at the number of chemicals that can cause that type of cancer. And what I'll emphasize to you is notice those that have an S on the end. Aldehydes, benzene substitutes, etc. Any that have an S on the end is not one chemical. That's a class of chemicals. It could be 10 or 20 chemicals that could be produced by the fire. I consider it one chemical in my talent, but it could be many. And so this is the cancer concern. Next. Two underappreciated risks. Cancer-promoting chemicals and hormone disruptors. Cancer-promoting are chemicals that they know from their research do not cause cancer, but they promote other chemicals to produce more and more severe cancers. So they promote cancer, they don't cause it. And there were several chemicals that are released by the fires in that category. The others over here are hormone disruptors. And the hormone disruptors, again, I think all of these, I can't see clearly, I think all of these have an S following them. And the number in parentheses is the number of chemicals in that category. So you've got 17 different chemicals that can disrupt hormones. We've heard of all kinds of hormone problems in kids in the local area. Now, if I lived in Pittsburgh and my 8-year-old had a hormone problem, would I attribute it to the chemicals released in East Palestine? Probably not. But it may very well be. And so these kinds of fertility, infertility, early births, infant challenges of newborns are closely related to some of these kinds of hormone disruptions. Next, please. And so here are what I class broadly as neurological effects. And look at the list. It's a long list here of things that fall under the generic category of neurology. That's related to brain and nerves. But look at the number of chemicals and chemical classes that cause those effects. It's no wonder people were experiencing them in a relatively high incidence. Next. All right. Dioxins is one of the most toxic chemicals known, was released by several of the materials in the fire, including the plastic pellets, including the semolina, and many of the other products, released dioxins. EPA came out and told people that don't worry about it being on your soil or in your gardens because it isn't taken up by plants. Well, here's the data. This is a family in East Palestine that had garlic before the incident. And my friend Scott Smith took samples after and analyzed them for dioxins. And you can see for yourselves the change in the numbers before and after. I'd say garlic took dioxins up from the soil. EPA has come out almost every spring and told people to go ahead and plant your gardens. If I lived there, I wouldn't plant a garden. I talked to a family today who brought in truckloads of soil from outside the area to have above ground gardens. They don't use the soil that's native there, even though it may be rich soil, but it's richer now after that incident. I want to emphasize, I'm sorry, go back just a minute. I want to emphasize a couple things here. These are the cancers that dioxins can produce. I forget now, it looks like there's 7 different kinds of cancer, not just one. And I look for acceptable exposure limits. The only one I could find was the Food and Drug Administration. They said 50 parts per trillion in fish and shellfish. I've since found, just recently, in the last few days, found a number for the EPA that's about 6 decimal points out that they would say you shouldn't have in your soil. or water. And so the dioxins are really potent, and these are part of the forever chemicals. The lifespan, if you get dioxins in your body, they say that they'll stay there for 7 to 11 years. In your soil, they'll stay 100 years. Next, please. Now, this is from Ashley McCollum. Early on, she gave me her list. I reorganized it by symptoms, 95 symptoms that she had accumulated from people in the area that had, and I reorganized it by organ systems in the body. The key thing here, though, is I've said it once before in tonight's comments, there are no health standards for mixtures. None. So nobody really knows how to do that. And the plume contaminants here from incomplete combustion, I identified all of those as single chemicals. So the report in my own tables are the single chemical effects, not the combination. And nobody has looked at what chemicals could have been occurred in the fire itself from the fire products. Okay, next. I just want to emphasize to you people here in Pittsburgh, the plume sizes. This is one. Go ahead. This is another. This plateaued off because there was a temporal inversion, and it plateaued at about 3,000 feet, which meant it had to spread. Couldn't go up anymore. Go ahead. Here's a long distance one, and if I'm not mistaken, this picture was taken from Pennsylvania. So this is the area of ground zero, if you will, from Pennsylvania. Next. This is one taken from an airplane, but I have no idea what the dimensions of it are. How many miles it crosses that? But that's East Palestine's underneath that. Next. EPA did a test on June 6th, prior to the burn. And what they wanted to see is what direction would the wind blow the materials when they burn. This is when they were going to burn vinyl chloride. And they forecast it would go southeast. Southeast towards what town? Pittsburgh. This was their forecast. And so they decided that they were going to take samples in this area to see how contaminated it was. Next. This is what actually happened. They sampled here. The wind said it was going to go this way, so that's where they decided to sample. At noon, there wasn't any wind. It was steady. In the afternoon, the wind blew northeast. They had planned, their plan was that they would sample here for how much it was contaminated, and they would sample here as background. They had backwards. This is where it should have been background, and this is where it should have been polluted. They've never acknowledged that error. And that was information determined by another, what I call a highly credible toxicologist chemist that studied for the plaintiff's attorneys, and they wouldn't let him publish his report, and they didn't present it in the case. So it's buried. Next. The only thing in this chart is that I want you just to scan the highlights as much as you can and see how many times Pittsburgh or the wind direction here from northwest. But in this is a air dispersion analysis. I didn't do it. I just interpreted it and summarized it. That went 24/7 from the first of the fire to the end of the fire. And from this analysis, I calculated that it covered at least 8 states, not just East Palestine. The next. This was a published analysis that says it covered 16 states, not just East Palestine. Next. And so well, I'll skip over this. This is really in the legal arena for criminal prosecutions, but I identified early on a number of areas. Next. And so perhaps my last comment here is that there are a lot of people, Mike Stout being one of the key leaders here, that are working on this to try and get information out that's credible and truthful and puts a perspective on the problem. I think that's probably the last one. Yes. So the net result is, this is the first time you've been confronted with this information. And my question to you, I'm going to be open later for questions from you, but my question to you is, what are you going to do about the information you got tonight? You're going to go home and forget it? Or you're going to start ringing Mike's phone and get involved? It's important for you to consider, because this can be affecting not only you and your generation, but future generations. So I leave that to you to think about. And at the end, I'll be open, as long as you need for questions. Thank you.
Group of us right now, outside of the area, myself, Steve Mellon, and a couple of others, we watched what was going on and realized somebody had to come help these folks and work with them. And if you want to know what to do and what you can do to help yourself and help your community, I want to sum up with a couple of things here. Number one, if you listen to what the speakers were saying, information and getting the truth out is one of the main ways we're going to change this reality for you. Getting the truth out means two things. One, letting us know what you're going through so we can let the powers that be know what you're going through. Ashley's survey is critical. Amassing that information about what you're going through, because the argument is you're not going through anything. You're all just faking it. That's the argument. We know that's not true. We need to let them know we know it's not true. And number two, we ain't going away. Information is key. We need, George did a presentation. His presentation is about 40 minutes. We have that presentation online, just like you saw him narrated here with the slides. We can send that to you, and you can show that to your neighbors, show that to your family, show that to your school, etc., etc. Keep the pressure up, and the only thing that keeps the pressure up is the truth. That's what's going to change the reality. Number two, we've established some mechanisms to try to help people, because there's a lawsuit filed, but the lawsuit's going to take 3 years at least. So we got to keep people alive and as healthy as we can for the next 3 years. So what we did is myself, Robin Lesko, who is the sister you met in the back when you came in that greeted you, Steve Mellon, Mike Blonick. What we're doing is we set up a nonprofit. The nonprofit is called Ohio Valley Derailment Mutual Aid. And what we're doing is we're collecting money specifically to get to people that need help now. I don't care if it's help with medical co-pays, help with getting your electricity and gas going in your places where you live, help with getting a job, whatever you need. We have a survey, and it's called a needs survey. We can send that survey to you, and we're going to, because if you put your name on the list back there, we're going to send you the survey. If you got something wrong with you, or you got something you need, let us know. We've already raised over $10,000. We've passed out over $7,000 already. We're going to keep it up. We're not only going to keep it up, but we're going to raise enough money to get you relocated and get you evacuated out of this place. That's our goal. And I want to say one other thing. There's a lie being spread around this community that those of us that are doing this, myself, George, Steve Mellon, etc., that we're somehow getting big bucks behind the scenes or some nonsense like that. I read today on Facebook. I want to make this clear. We, and myself included, have not and will not take 1 penny. 1 penny. Everything's going to go to you. The nonprofit we set up doesn't have a middle person, doesn't have a bureaucrat running it. It's me. And all I'm doing is the money's coming in and the money's going right back out to people who need it. We've passed out over $6,000 already, and we're going to continue doing it. So right now, like Krista said, is I'd like to bring up some of the warriors here that are fighting this battle, both in western Pennsylvania, in the Darlington, Chippewa area, as well as East Palestine. These are the folks that I hooked up with in the beginning. They're the fiercest warriors I've ever met, and some of the smartest working class people I've ever met. I'd like to bring them up here and give some personal testimony.
I got was from social media. I got up and I told my dad who I live with, that there was a train derailment in East Palestine. I'm from Darlington, and about 5.9 miles away from East Palestine. And we live in the middle of the woods, but we went out on our front porch, and you could see the fire and the smoke through the trees. And obviously, as a mother, I thought, are we safe? That night, it looked like the sun was setting, but it was after 9 o'clock at night. My son was afraid to go back to bed. He was afraid that another train would derail or that the fire could get to us. Later that night, at about midnight, I learned off of Facebook that the firefighters were being pulled from the incident. And as a former firefighter myself, I figured, well, that's not good, because you only get pulled from a scene if there's a danger to your life as well. Over the weekend, from what I could see online, it looked like the fires had gone out for the most part. But come Sunday night, the incident happened on Friday. On Sunday night, I started to hear that people were being evacuated. On Monday morning, the 6th of February, I got up and I got my son ready to go to preschool, and I learned that they were going to blow up one of the vinyl chloride cars. I'd never heard of vinyl chloride before, so I didn't really even know what it was. Told my dad what was happening, and he said, well, that's a really toxic chemical. We looked online to see if there was any news about our area, and I learned that roads were being closed from the Pennsylvania border to East Palestine. I debated on sending my son to school, and then we got a notification from the school district that they were evacuating the morning students to go back home. And so that made my decision of whether I was going to send my son to school. But since we got that notification, I started wondering if we were safe again. And I ran all over my house like a chicken with my head cut off in a panic, packing up what I needed to take with me if we were going to be evacuated, trying to find out where I could go. There were no hotel rooms left at that point. There was friends and family I couldn't get a hold of. And so about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I think it was when they were supposed to originally blow up 5 vinyl chloride cars instead of just 1. And I said to my dad, well, I guess we're just going to sit here and wait and see if we die. We didn't get any evacuation order where I live. We only got a voicemail from the 911 dispatch that said that they were evacuating people in 1 mile area. About an hour after the vent and burn happened, I started getting sick. Initially, I thought that I was just getting the flu. But as time went on, symptoms got worse. For the next 6 to 8 months, I continued to be sick every day. I have a list of some of the symptoms here, but a lot of them will sound familiar to Times Beach. I had coughing, migraines, headaches, difficulty breathing, a burning throat. At one point, it felt like somebody was burning me with acid from the inside out. My nose and eyes burned. My voice got lost from my throat being blistered. I had itchy eyes. My scalp and skin were itchy. I was tired, had body aches, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, both at the same time sometimes. I was continuously thirsty. I had a lack of appetite, brain fog, dizziness, smelled strange smells that smelled like a swimming pool. a sweet bleach smell or burning rubber. I had this strange metallic taste in my mouth all the time. Congestion, runny nose, pressure in my ears. I had shorter and missed menstrual cycles. Tingling in my legs and feet. I was diagnosed with an ear infection when I first went to the clinic that they had set up for us in town. Then I went to urgent care, and they diagnosed me with an upper respiratory infection. And then I was sent to my doctor, and they diagnosed me with exposure to toxins. A lot of people in East Palestine weren't able to get that diagnosis. And on February 14th of 2023, I started hearing about dead fish and frogs in the creeks. And so I decided to go to the creek and find out for myself, because I didn't believe everything that I would read online. And saw those dead fish and frogs. I think there was eventually the number was 43,000. And I also saw aerators, which are things that they use to pull the water up from the creek and then blow it out to expose it to the air in hopes of cleaning it. As time went on, I continued to go to the creeks because I knew something wasn't right. You could see a rainbow sheen. It looked like an oil spill in the creek, and it went from the derailment site to about, I'd say like 3 miles down to Negley, which was south of East Palestine. And that would go all through town up in East Palestine. But the EPA was telling us that everything was fine. And that this, like from the start, they told us it's just anxiety that our symptoms were from, but we all knew it wasn't. In October of 2023, November of 2023, I started doing testing in the creeks with a group from down here, Three Rivers Waterkeeper, and a lot of these chemicals that we found in the creek were above the ecological screening levels, meaning that they're probably the reason why the fish were dead. But we were also exposed to these chemicals. And then there were ones that we also found in the creek that had no screening levels by the EPA standards. I've been to the creeks in East Palestine over the last 2 years, about 35 times that I've recorded video for. My symptoms that I've continued to have are coughing, migraines, headaches, sensitive to smells like the laundry soap aisle. I can't stand that out. Itchy ears and scalp, tiredness. I've got tremors now. That I attribute to being in the creeks. I've lost 20 pounds in about a month and a half. Brain fog, loss of thoughts after about a year from the derailment. I started to have other menstrual issues where I had that for about 8 months every day except for 4 days of each month. I've had pneumonia, and they've diagnosed me with anxiety, depression, PTSD, and I have to have my gallbladder removed. Over the course of 2 years, many of us have contacted a lot of our government officials. Some of these names you might recognize. Representative Krista Luzio, Representative Josh Kale, Jim Marshall, Senators Bob Casey and Elder Vogel, John Fetterman, Senator and now Vice President J.D. Vance, Governor Shapiro, Governor Mike DeWine, President Biden, President Trump, the East Palestine Mayor, the U.S. EPA, the Ohio EPA, the PA Department of Environmental Protection, the CDC, the Department of Health, FEMA, many people that work in the White House, other representatives and senators from other states, so the government is very well aware of what's happened here, and they've done nothing to help us.
Not one bottle of water.
And not even a bottle of water, except from when Trump was not president, he brought us water. It took Joe Biden over a year to come to East Palestine, and he didn't even meet with most of the residents. He met with a select few, like the mayor. J.D. Vance just came here in February, and again, he met with the same people. He's very, very aware of our story. He's talked to us almost weekly, and yet nothing has been done. I think that one thing that I wanted to say was that I don't spend much time in the creeks now because of how sick I got, but a lot of us have felt like we've been forgotten about, and many of us have been let down by our government and by a lot of our own family and neighbors and friends. The reasons why I did what I did with going in the creeks was because I didn't want to let my neighbors down. I was always taught by my grandmother that you love your neighbor as yourself. And I didn't know any of the people in East Palestine, and not many of the people where I lived either before this happened, but I had full intentions on loving my neighbor because that's what we were supposed to do. And to take care of the environment because that's what we were put here to do. And I think that's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. I'd like to bring up another resident from Western Pennsylvania. Carly?
Hello, everybody. My name is Carly Tuno. I'm a lifetime resident of Beaver County, 2007 graduate from Blackhawk High School, a part-time server at a local restaurant, a mother of 3 boys, and my newest role, community activist. Public speaking does not come easy for me, but telling my story helps spread awareness and educate others, then I feel I must. If we are not willing to fight for our communities, towns, region, and River Valley, why would anybody else? So thank you, Mike Stout, for pushing me to speak here this evening. And everyone else who had a hand in this event. For the past 2+ years, I, along with others, have spent countless hours reading, analyzing, learning, educating others, writing politicians, calling agencies, attending meetings, telling my story, and I don't feel anything has yet to come up this situation that makes a difference. Our concerns and questions still have not been addressed. We have been gaslit and deflected at every angle. Doctors refuse to address it, only treat the symptoms. State reps install carbon filtration systems in their own homes and give you the line, "I drink the same water as you," when you meet with them. It's not my job to educate the public on the dangers, just evaluate the risks, says the EPA, knowing damn well an uneducated public won't understand the intentionally skewed way of interpreting the results. Only using legacy contamination as a reason not to give us accurate data on what this impact and derailment have and will continue to have is a poor excuse of protection. Although legacy contaminants may have been present prior, my hair was also. Non-scarring alopecia was my diagnosis. It should grow back, they said, after tests of my hormones, blood panels, and a scalp biopsy. All tests came back within normal range. The truth is, and they refuse to admit it, I, along with everyone else, was dosed with more toxins than my system could handle. I vomited for days after the vent and burn. My vial I vomited had an oil sheen to it. We inhaled that stuff for days, and nobody realizes the dangers of dioxin, especially TCDD, because it has been covered up by industry and government for decades. Doctors can blame stress, but stress is nothing new to those of us who work for a living to get by. Not to mention, I am a mother of one plus a set of twins. Stress I can handle. What I can't handle, and I will not handle, is watching members of my community struggle to get by while falling ill and caring for sick kids and parents, all the while being lied to and giving a false sense of security. I recently discovered about committees locally that deal with and prepare for situations such as what happened in East Palestine. I was quite shocked, to say the least. My request for public information under the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act was met with such hostility and more red tape. But I, along with others, will persevere and continue to fight for answers and justice for our community. The roots I have personally in my community are deep and cannot be shaken. Just leave the area, I've been told. Packing up and leaving is not an option when everyone you know and love lives in your community. I am proud to say I'm union bred, union fed, and union wed. I have it instilled in me that when we fight together for better conditions, we have a better chance of getting results. I will continue to educate anyone who will listen on my lessons learned, preach unity to get things done, and encourage people to take interest in local politics and, more importantly, local journalism. Thank you, Steve Mellon, because that's how our democracy works. And I would like to give special thanks to George and Marilyn for being here and coming here again and help educating members of my community. Thank you all.
I'd like to bring up one more witness. Ashley was one of the first, I think about the third person I met in East Palestine. And this young woman has done meticulous research and dug up more evidence on the EPA and the shenanigans they played in Norfolk Southern than the entire government put together. Ashley McCullough.
I would just like to let you guys know, I wasn't planning on coming. I was struggling a lot with PTSD, and I still do, and it's daily. I don't like going out into places. I talk to these ladies almost weekly. There was times where we talked every single day. My whole life, from the time I woke up in the morning at 8 o'clock until I went to bed sometimes at 10 o'clock, was research, reading documents, looking over things, finding out why my son has acne from being in town when he's 7 years old, finding out why my cycles are consistently lasting a lot more than they should. But I evacuated February 3rd. The night that it happened, my son and I were enjoying a movie on the couch where he fell asleep. We heard sirens go by, and that's not common in East Palestine. We heard another round of sirens go by, and we knew something was wrong. At the front door, we didn't see anything, but the back door looked like the entire town was on fire. And while I stood there with the door open, my son started panicking, saying, "Mom, we have to leave." A 6-year-old knew it was dangerous and that we had to leave. I got bound to him, almost in a movie moment, is how I remember it, and telling him, "It's gonna be okay, we're gonna get out of here." I gave him a bag to put his belongings in. I grabbed my animals, and I called my mom. She came there. As residents were going outside, they had no idea to leave. They didn't think it was dangerous. I started telling them they have to leave when we had police officers running down the streets, not even knocking on doors, telling people to leave. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up all night long watching to see if my house was still gonna be there. I stayed up listening to my son crying in his sleep. I listened to my boyfriend weeks after that crying in his sleep, and occasionally my son. And I felt like I had to be there, just like to be there for all these people, and they've been there for me. And sometimes I wish, when the town was evacuated, my house could have just caught on fire with it. Because it's a house I can't touch. It's memories that I won't be able to hold and share. I don't know what to do with it. I can't throw it away. I was relocated in a hotel for over a year. Then we relocated to a camper that turned into another camper. The last time my son was in the house since the derailment was on his birthday. He wanted to see his lizard, and just how you all saw that mask that Christina's son was wearing, I didn't want him to touch anything. We made everything still in the house, He went to his room and held his lizard for the last time. That was the last time that lizard was alive. It died in the house. It stopped eating and stopped moving, and I watched it happen on a security camera I had set up for him. Our animals vomited after the controlled explosion, which I only went 3 miles away from East Palestine into Pennsylvania where my mom lives. She still doesn't know if her water's okay to drink in her well. She's experiencing symptoms like them. If it wasn't for all these people talking and communicating, I would have not been able to make the list and tell people what's really going on. I want you guys to understand this could happen again, it could happen here, this could be going on right now with you guys. And community is what I have. I thank everything for these ladies and these people that have helped me and still continue to help. And I just want to thank you all for coming and being here for us and hearing our stories too.
Thank you for being here to help our community, to help East Palestine and our surrounding communities. You know how this has affected me personally. My home is at Ground Zero in East Palestine. We were roughly 1,200 feet from where those fires, where they blew that train up unnecessarily. It was uncalled for. I don't understand. I still don't understand. Here we are over 2 years later. We're still fighting for truth and accountability and transparency from our own government and from the EPA. We know for a fact that what they tell us. How are we supposed to trust them? How are we supposed to trust them?
And I'd like to dedicate this to the folks in East Palestine and Western PA here that are going through this mess and still standing up and fighting. Songs of the night. Step through the trees, deep inside your city, you will find me. War of the small, war of the flea, where the strongest bomb is a human bursting to be free, and your eyes will be my lantern, your heart will show the way to sow the seeds of courage we need to find today, to build a better future for the children that remain, where the joy will be the sunshine, their tears will be the rain. Songs of the night shift with the breeze all around this rural country. You will find me. War of the small, war of the flea, where the strongest bomb is a human bursting to be free, and you people are my shelter, your struggle is my bed, your life will be the pillow upon which I lay my head, and though death may come tomorrow, my dreams will come tonight, frighten off all the demons that tell us not to get together and fight. Songs of the night drift with the leaves all around this country. You will find me. War of the small, war of the flea, where the strongest bomb is a human bursting to be free.
We were bursting to be free. I was bursting to be free. That's for all of you. Thank you.
To introduce our next guest, I'd like to bring up one of your citizens who was actually the second person I met from East Palestine and has become a dear friend. And she's on top of the situation here, and you're lucky to have somebody like that speaking up for you every day and every night. So with that, I'd like to introduce Krista Graves.
Okay, I'm Krista Graves. As you all know, we were all affected differently. Some were right down on the tracks, some were out of town, some were at the 1 mile's edge, and some were out farther. And nobody really knew what to do and what to expect throughout that whole event. I had no idea if my family was supposed to evacuate or not, because initially they told us that malt liquor and frozen vegetables were burning. And then I'm seeing on Facebook that people down near the tracks were being evacuated. They say my road, but they don't show my road on the evacuation map. So my family and I didn't know what we were supposed to do until Sunday night when we were personally advised. And for that, I'll always be thankful. When I talked to all my newly formed friends throughout the crowd and see how differently we were each affected, and that led me to searching for other disasters, to Times Beach and Love Canal. And anybody, I expected there to be tons of data on each of these events from which we could draw experience from, and I found that not to be true. And on YouTube, I found a documentary on Times Beach, and I watched it over and over. And one night, I saw Marilyn Leisner's name on that documentary. And I thought, oh, I wonder if I can get a hold of her. And I typed her name into Facebook, and I found a Marilyn Leisner. I sent a message. I thought, I hope I didn't just open the worst chapter of this lady's life and really upset her. I thought I'd hear from her in the morning because it was pretty late on our time. But in about half an hour to an hour, I got a message back. And she said, hey, I'd love to talk to you, but it's really late. I need to get some sleep. But I'm going to tell you, get as far away from there as fast as you can and take as little as you can with you. And I'll catch up with you tomorrow. And I've come to believe that that's what we should be doing. I have family members and loved ones in the crowd who have relocated. Some had assistance from Norfolk for a time. Some did not. Some chose not to go that route. And then my family was not allowed because we are 1 to 2 tenths of a mile outside of the 1 mile zone. We were not allowed. We weren't given that option. So I went to where I thought I would learn the best from the people who experienced a similar disaster and a similar chemical exposure to see what I could learn that could help my family and your families. And we've brought my newest best friend with me and her family and her community member here, Frank, so that she can tell you a little about their community and what they experienced and how it might relate to how we can apply that to our lives. So without any further, I'd like to introduce Marilyn Leisner and Frank Perler.
Thank you. Before I get into this presentation, I would like to say this. To get that call from Krista was sad for me because I visioned the people of East Palestine experiencing the same things that the people of my community experienced. I can talk a little bit about Times Beach. I graduated from high school there in 1956, and I met my husband. He was home on leave from the Marine Corps. He was stationed at Camp Pendleton in California. At the time I met him, I was also working as a telephone operator in Kirkwood and transferring back and forth, and it was kind of a pain. So in order to make a little money, I would work in the restaurant and make chili because they liked my chili. Eventually, I became really attached to Jerry and his family. And in December of 1956, I moved in with his mom and dad. Our plans were to go to California to marry to get married. In California at the time, a man had to be 21 in order to get married. So his mother decided she and I would make the trip. She would sign the paperwork and we would get married, which we did. I was 4 months pregnant when I came back to Times Beach, and it was a couple of weeks later before he came back to Times Beach. I was very lonesome there. I thought at first it was the most godforsaken place I'd ever seen. After I became acquainted with it and the people and my in-laws, I learned to love the community. I became very much a part of the community. I was a Sunday school teacher. I was the secretary of the church. I did so many things there to make my kids and the community happy. In 1978, my husband developed a seizure, a disorder. He was the road commissioner, and his hands and his face, he just looked horrible. And we took him to doctors to find out what was wrong, and no doctor could tell us what was wrong with him. So finally, a doctor came up with the idea to take him to Dr. Hope, a doctor in St. Louis, who looked at him and diagnosed him with something called porphyria cutanea tartar, which can be associated to the exposure of Times Beach and the dioxin. A few months later, my daughter Jerry Lynn developed a very rare seizure disorder, and the doctors diagnosed it as something psychomatic due to a traumatic experience. And of course, we got her on medicine and taken care of, and it wasn't very long after that my daughter Tammy developed a goiter. She was like this. Her eyes were bugged in her head. She was very sick. Her blood pressure was up. Her pulse was up. I worked in a medical center for doctors, and I finally got the pediatrician to look at her, and he put her in the hospital, and she was in the hospital 5 weeks being treated for hypothyroidism. Finally, the medicine started to work, and it did help to lower her thyroid. About the same time, my daughter, LaDonna, developed a problem. Her lips would swell, even with her nose, her eyes would swell shut. She could hardly breathe. She would have rashes, hives all over her body. And she was in the hospital for 5 weeks. And we couldn't put a name on any of these things or where they came from. I was from a family of 10, and all that was experienced in my family was measles, mumps, and chickenpox. So this was very difficult for me to understand what was going on with my children. Finally, one day, November the 10th, 1982, I got a call at work telling me that a reporter had just discovered that Times Beach was on a list of sites suspected to have been sprayed with a chemical called dioxin. In 1971, myself and my neighbors paid this man $50 a barrel to spray it on our streets to control the dust. In 72 and 73, the city hired this man to spray at will at 6 cents a gallon. Soon after that, people started getting sick. And I can contribute my kids' health problems not to what he sprayed after, but what he sprayed before. The government knew 10 years before we knew that it was there. And they did nothing. They thought that in a year or so it would go away, and it didn't go away. It continually got worse, and we met with the EPA, and they told us that there was nothing they could do, that they didn't have a plan, they didn't have a lab, and it would be a year or so before they could do anything to help us. But in the meantime, I was kind of optimistic. I didn't want to believe it was there. So I called Russell Bliss, the waste oil hauler, and I asked him, did you spray chemicals on our streets containing dioxin? And he said, if I sprayed your streets in 71, there was no dioxin there. If I sprayed them in 72 and 73, they were contaminated. And he told me the name of a lab, Envirodyne Engineers, that could test our streets. So I started collecting money to run the test, because just one test for dioxin to determine if it was there was $2,400. All I could collect was $2,700. So we started sampling, and at the same time, the EPA, learning about this lab, also tested with us. You can see our water tower. We were very proud of that water tower. On December the 3rd, we were told by the Corps of Engineers that the river was going to come up and it was going to be at extensive levels, and that people needed to move to safer grounds. On December 5th, when the EPA and this lab was testing for the dioxin, my husband and I and my daughter Jerry Lynn and our dog moved out of Times Beach. We went out by boat. That was the only way we could get out. The water crest at 22.88 feet, which was a record set for Times Beach. But the mud and the debris from the floodwaters was all over the community. The EPA, knowing that this was going on, became very concerned and started to help us with cleaning up. They started cleaning up stuff outside the buildings, inside the buildings, and in testing it, they said there was no dioxin in any of the material that they moved. They moved it up to Warrenton, Missouri. In doing all of this work, the first mayor, Joe Capstick, who worked for Monsanto, was told that dioxin's not harmful. So he started rebuilding. He retired, he resigned as mayor, and started rebuilding his house. I was waiting for a call back from the lab. On December the 10th of 1982, Envirodyne engineer called me and said, we have a problem. And I said, well, what's the problem? There's something jamming the spectrometer, and there's only one thing that would do that. And I said, well, what is that? And they said, PCBs. So we not only had dioxin and PCBs, but in all of their work, they discovered that we had 12 chemicals, not just one or two. From then on, the EPA took over. The governor signed an order and gave it to the EPA. The EPA, FEMA, the state of Missouri Health Department, everyone stepped in to help us. We were not allowed to go into town. We were not allowed to go into our houses, but some people had already started rebuilding their homes because they didn't think it was harmful. Finally, we were convinced by labs test on December 23rd of 1983, 1983, the state of Missouri, the federal government came to a meeting, it was our Christmas party, and told us how harmful it was, and that if we were in town, to get out. If we were out of town, don't go back. So people started trying to rebuild their lives. And at that time, Ronald Reagan signed an order, turned it over to the EPA, and ordered the evacuation of the town and a buyout and relocation of all of the residents. It was through this that we became ex-residents of Times Beach, Missouri. Today, Times Beach has a lab. You can go there, you can see some of the things that,
Is that the museum?
that were part of the community, but in the legislation between the state and the federal government, nothing, everything that said dioxin or Times Beach was taken off the highway and out of the town, and that word was not to be in the museum, it was not to be on the highway, it was not to be on the town, it was not to be on any paperwork. They were trying to get rid of the stigma of the dioxin. Of course, the EPA worked to relocate us, and at the same time, this legislation was going on. The federal and state government sued Syntex, and of course was reimbursed for something like $36.5 million, which was the money to buy out the town, to relocate the people, and to make it safe for us to live again. Yes.
Next slide.
The Environmental Protection Agency personnel took samples, and no explanation, they did take samples. On that December 23rd, they told us that they found levels less than 100 parts per billion in the community. We had friends in Washington, D.C. and in St. Louis and the CDC who had been trying for the 10 years that the dioxin was there to bring it to a head and let the people know that it was there. A doctor that was there and a vet anonymously gave the test results to a member of our community who turned those test results over to a newspaper. The state was telling us the levels were less than 100 parts per billion when in fact the test results showed 1,200 parts per billion. And then there was a problem over that. Actually, the EPA sued the chemical companies. Many people were given money. There were lawsuits, personal injury lawsuits, and many people were given money by 2 or 3 different lawsuits. And the chemical companies were out billions of dollars. And they brought in their, what we called the Blue Goose, which was an incinerator to incinerate the dioxin. And they cleaned up some 265 million tons of dioxin. They brought the dioxin from the 28 other sites in Missouri to Times Beach to clean it up. And if you tour Times Beach today, and of course if I tour with you, I can show you where the incinerator sat. Because the community flooded, it had to be up high. I can show you where they put the debris that came from the incinerator. It's still all there. And I can show you the mound. We call it the town mound, where everything that was in that community was buried. It was buried in what we call a football field, a 4-sized football field. And around that football field, there are monitors wells that monitor what's going on underground. At first, every 6 months, they monitored what was in those wells. Then every year, then 4 years. And now every 5 years, they come in and they take samples of what's in those monitor wells and what is in that mound in the event that there's something there that's leaching into our groundwater. I will tell you this, there were many sick people, and those people were sick before we knew the dioxin was there. It was 10 years before they told us. And if it hadn't have been for a lady named Judy Pyatt, who had a horse arena, who had a horse relationship with Russell Bliss, the sprayer of the chemicals, he sprayed her arena. The birds fell from the ceiling and died. Her dog died. Her cat died. Both her kids ended up in the hospital, and she buried 62 horses. She sued. And even then, they didn't tell us. They didn't tell us until the reporter found it on a list of sites in 1982. I will tell you that there are people in Times Beach that have passed away since then. I had a family that lived on the corner from me. The young couple just got married. They had an infant that was born with neuroblastoma. Within 4.5 months, that infant died. They went to 3 different specialists to see if their chances of having another such infant were possible. And they were told by 3 different doctors that there was no chance that another infant would be born with neuroblastoma. Beverly became pregnant, and very shortly a baby was born that died at 6.5 months. Her husband died almost 10 years later with neuroblastoma. I had a couple that lived next door to me that had just moved there. They'd only been there a short while. When they moved there, they had a little boy who was the healthiest little boy you'd ever want to see. After they'd been there a year, Jan became pregnant. The baby was born. The baby was born with all kinds of health problems and died at 4 months. After the buyout and after the family moved away, she became pregnant again and had another infant that was born the same way, and that infant also passed away. I can name cancers. There were 3 cases of neuroblastoma in the community. My husband had neuroblastoma. Two other men in the community had neuroblastoma. We had one man who had both breasts removed due to cancer. We had several women, one young girl, 13 years old, who died from breast cancer. We had a 23-year-old who died from breast cancer. I want the people of this community to become aware that there's a problem from this chemical. And the biggest problem we had was that the doctors didn't know anything about dioxin or how to treat it or what to do with it. It became a problem. In school, our kids that lived in Times Beach went to school, and other kids from other communities also went to school. At school, the Times Beach children were separated from the other children and were not to be anywhere near any of the other children because there was an article, a huge article in the paper that said chloracne was very contagious, and chloracne is a result of dioxin. And those parents didn't want their kids near those children. And so the school's teachers separated the children from Times Beach and the children from the other schools. Today, I have seen people from my community, young people, pass away. I wonder sometimes, is it the dioxin? Or is it something else? But yet, it's difficult to believe that these people lived with this chemical all these years and were so sick. Many of our people are lost. And the people of East Palestine need to find a way to see a doctor, to get examined and taken care of. I know the community is divided. My community was divided. We had 93% of the people that wanted to be bought out and only 7% that wanted to stay. I didn't want to stay. My husband and my children were out. We didn't need to go back. I begged him to let us stay out. For weeks, he and I argued and fussed. I threatened him with divorce. I didn't want to stay. But I came home one night and he said, Marilyn, I'll make a deal with you. He said, if you run for mayor, I'll run for marshal and we'll clean this up together. He did. He worked with me. I worked with him. We did everything we can to keep the people out of the site. And a funny story is a truck driver on Interstate 44 drove up to the side of the road, went down into town, picked up a pair of women's panties, some dirty change, a wrench and a few other things, and he was arrested by the county police. They took him to jail. But because there was nothing in that community of any value, they couldn't prosecute him, they let him go. I will tell you I can tell you so many stories, but the story that I want you to hear is the story that there were many sicknesses, so many similar, the bloody noses, the rashes, the things that I see here in East Palestine that I saw in Times Beach. And we have to pressure our government to do something to see what we can't do to stop what's going on. We took out a petition with thousands of signatures on it. And I wrote an 8-page letter to President Reagan. He was coming to St. Louis in February of 1983 for an RCGA conference. I was not allowed at the conference because I was not a business person, but I sent the messages with a friend. The petition that was signed by over 1,500 people to buy out Times Beach, plus my letter explaining the health problems. I have a document with 14,062 health issues on it. So many of the health issues that I see here. I can't do anything but say a lot of prayers for the people in East Palestine and pray that the people that are here, that are fighting, continue to fight and try to get a resolution. At the time I was working in Times Beach, John Ashcroft had appointed me trustee. We had 28 sites. I was at one of the sites with several EPA members, and one of them said to me, there will never be another buyout of Times Beach. And I said, why? He said, because we have no place to go with any of this stuff. We were sitting in a trailer park with 50 some odd mobile homes, and those mobile home roads had been sprayed with the same chemical that sprayed Times Beach. They said they didn't know what to do with them. They took those mobile homes and cleaned them up to $95,000 a piece and put them back in the trailer park and put them back in the people that lived in them. Because they didn't have any place to put those trailer parks. In Times Beach, the trailer parks are in the mound, what we call the town mound. You have this gentleman here. He has been an enormous help. I can't tell you not to listen to him, because everything I've seen is more than enough to help you people. I petitioned, and you people need to get a petition and send it to the president of the, put a nice heading on it, send it to the president of the United States. He needs to sign a document authorizing the EPA to come in and do something. You people can't live like that. And as I can see, the water, I can't see the water ever being clean in East Palestine. Are there any questions?
Pardon?
Frank, want to say anything?
Frank?
I remember a time Russell Bliss come back in to spray the roads, and they had some problems with a bunch of dead birds, some pets, and they stopped him from spraying. And he got upset at it because he had a whole truckload of oil he needed to get rid of. So we had a park area that we was starting to build, and we had it leveled out and everything. And he drove around there. It was kind of out of sight along the railroad tracks, and he went over there and he dumped that entire load of docks and an oil mix into that park area, which on one of the slides it showed there, but it was the highest concentration in the entire beach. I just don't understand some of the things that happen and where we're at today, the things we know today, and stuff like this is still going on. You know, to be able to bust holes in the railroad cars and catch them fire and think that would get rid of the problem. When we had an incinerator burning for 10 years, where they augered the soil up to loosen it as it went through the burner and got it to the right temperature, and then it went back through again just to get rid of the docks, and how they thought that just catching a fire where it was. And even if they thought would get rid of it, why wasn't y'all evacuated while it was going on? I don't understand it.
The oil that was dumped in the storm drain in the park, the city got a complaint from a man who had driven on his street that had just been sprayed, and it took the paint off his car. So he called City Hall. He went right to City Hall. And the road commissioner at that time was not my husband. The road commissioner stopped the spraying, but the truck driver went down to our brand new city park, opened the spigot, and ran everything that was in his truck down in our storm drain, which drains into the Merrimack River. And at one point, they tested in the Merrimack, and they did find dioxin in the sediment, and it's still there. They can't clean it up. But they put signs up and down the river that said, limit consumption of the fish from the river to once a month. Would you want to eat those fish? No.
Each year we put on town reunions to keep the community together and stuff. And I put those on each year, and it's just open for anybody that wants to come. And we have different people coming each year, but we have lost a lot of people over the years. It's been a long time.
In the early years, in 1983, after, well, we learned about it in 92, in 1983, we asked for a health study. and they told us there was no money for a health study. But they did pick 105 people from some of the different sites. There were 28 sites in Missouri. And I asked, since my family had health problems, to be put in that study, and they refused because I was a city official. We still don't know the results of that study of 105 people. But we were told that as the people passed away, the state of Missouri would be monitoring the death certificates to see what was going on. We've never heard, and it's over 43 years, and we've never heard a single word about anybody dying or any death certificates. We've heard absolutely nothing.
We're going to talk about the health symptoms. This is part of the compiled list.
I wanted to talk about some of the issues that we had at Times Beach, which I see similar here. One thing that was constant, and my nose was operated. I talked to Scott Smith all the time about my nose. I had my nose operated on 3 times because it kept bleeding. Rashes, acne. My daughter LaDonna at one point was diagnosed with the start of chloracne. And of course, about that time, she moved away to Lake of the Ozarks. Actually, when she moved away, the rash stopped. All the swelling and the problems, the highs went away. Headaches was something that was very, very common. Horrible headaches. Stomach disorders, bladder infections, eye disorders, heart issues, fatigue, enlarged liver problems, miscarriages, stillborn babies, tumors, menstrual vaginal issues, hypertension, cysts, urinary tract infections, hysterectomies, seizures, teeth problems. A lot of people here I have read about having teeth problems. Ulcers, thyroid dysfunction was one of the biggest things at Times Beach. We learned early on that the chemical attacks the hormones. Loss of hair. We had people that lost a lot of their hair, if not all of it. So these are Times Beach issues, and these issues are so similar to the issues that you are experiencing here. Last time I was here, last September, I met a young girl, a beautiful young girl, who had lost all of her hair and was wearing a turban. It was sad. Another thing that is really not on here was marital problems. The second mayor, his wife didn't want to stay there. He wanted to stay. His house was on the 2nd story and was not damaged by the flood, and he wanted to stay, and she did not want to stay. She was scared. They ended up divorced. He ended up in a room at one of our local hotels and tried to kill himself, but the police caught him in time. There were drinking disorders. There was child abuse. And there were so many things attributable to this chemical that you see today. And I can tell you that I was very young. I was having a lot of female problems. My periods were not just 3 or 4 days a month. They were 3 weeks a month. I was having all kinds of menstrual problems. So finally, my doctor said, let's put you in the hospital. Let's do a serious exam and see what is going on. The doctor removed 5 tumors, 5 growths. He said he didn't know what they were, but he removed them anyway. And I had a case of endometriosis, which is really unusual for a woman who has had children to have. Endometriosis is a disorder of the female organs. My daughter had endometriosis, and her doctor told her that if she would have a baby in 3 to 5 months, the endometriosis would go away and not come back. She did have a child, and that child was born with problems. My grandchildren all have problems. It's ADD, ADHD, my first granddaughter was born with a kidney block. 2 of my granddaughters have seizure disorders. It was just passed down the family. My son, who had the rare seizure disorder, they sent him to the Wool Clinic and they radioiodized him. He still today takes a medicine for this problem. It doesn't go away. Don't expect it to go away. You need to get help as soon as possible, right?
Absolutely right.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Now-
Marilyn. Give her a big hand.
Did any doctors address the situation locally?
The problem we had locally with the health issues was the doctors knew nothing about these chemicals, and they didn't know how to treat the disorders. We had dioxin, PCB, toluene, benzene, ethyl ether. We had 12 chemicals that they were exposed to. And the doctors didn't know how to treat those. Unfortunately, or fortunately, my husband went to a doctor down in the country who examined him and looked at him and sent him to the doctor in St. Louis, Dr. Hope, who had been appointed the doctor for St. Louis. And Dr. Hope diagnosed his problem as cutaneous tarda. I mean, they have pictures that they can show you of what he looked like before he got sick and what he looked like he got after he got the porphyria cutaneous tarda. He was having a internal bleeding problem, and they opened him up and couldn't find any place internally where he was bleeding. We had to put him on pads at night to sleep, and he passed away. And when he passed away, we were ordered to do an autopsy. In that autopsy, it was discovered that the blood was coming from a spot way up in the lungs. But he was not here. We couldn't do anything about it anymore.
Marilyn, it's Lonnie. I just want to thank you for being here. You and Dr. George Thompson, Krista, Frank, your family. Thank you for being here to help our community, to help East Palestine and our surrounding communities. You know how this has affected me.
We've been friends for a little while.
We've been friends for a little while now. You know how this has affected me personally. My home is at Ground Zero in East Palestine. We were roughly 1,200 feet from where those fires, where they blew that train up unnecessarily. It was uncalled for. I don't understand. I still don't understand. Here we are over 2 years later. We're still fighting for truth and accountability and transparency from our own government and from the EPA. We know for a fact that what they tell us, based on what you experienced, it took over 10 years for your community to be told the truth. How are we supposed to trust them? How are we supposed to trust them?
We don't, we have to keep working.
You know, when I first came here, when Krista first asked me to come, I have a very good friend who worked for the CIA for 31 years. And she was helping me. We were trying to put together 16 huge boxes of my documents. And she started studying some of these things. And today, I mean, she found one of my documents where I had talked to 1,462 people who had health problems. They would come to my temporary city hall and tell me about it. What we're trying to do today, there's over 1,600 written. What we're trying to do today is to put that together and give it to these doctors so that they can look at it and determine what can we do. Is there anything we can do to resolve some of these issues? Let's hope that when Sue gets through with her work, that we'll have a document. I wanted it for today, but she was only up to 600, and I just didn't think that was enough. But when she finishes that document, I would like it to go out to the people so they can see what the people from Times Speech suffered from.
How should we go about moving forward with our lives when this has consumed every part of our lives?
You know what? Saying how can you move so forward? I have the thyroid disorder and I'm on medicine. I have peripheral neuropathy. I have diabetes and I have heart problems. I see the doctors, they take care of them. I worry a lot, but we don't have any choice but to go on and hope that somewhere, someone is going to find a solution to the problem that we are all experiencing. And one thing that I was told that makes me angry, and I've written many letters, when I was out at the trailer park where they cleaned the trailers up, one of the EPM employees told me, Marilyn, there will never be another buyout. And I said, why? He said, what are we going to do with all this stuff? That was when they cleaned up all those trailers at $95,000 a trailer. At Times Beach, it went into a big hole. I mean, it's a huge, it's 4 football fields deep.
And your community was told that if you were to leave, don't take anything that was in your homes with you.
You were told to leave and not take anything from your homes?
Well, yeah, we lost a lot, didn't we, Tammy? We were told on December 23rd, after learning on December 5th that it was there, on December 23rd at our Christmas party, we were told, leave town, don't go back, and don't take anything with you. Everything that people owned in their homes, I mean, some of my mother's jewelry, pictures, my family pictures, everything that was in those homes stayed in those homes and is in that huge mound.
Do you still feel like that was the best and safest move for your community?
I believe it was the bestest and safest move for my community. In fact, to talk about something funny, at our last reunion, we had a young man there that wanted to bring his metal detector and find out what was in that mound. There are mobile homes, our city equipment. We wanted to keep our water tower as a monument to what was happened there, but they wouldn't let us keep it. We wanted them to document on a monument the people as they were brought out. There were 2,242 people, 801 families. There was 393 mobile homes. Some of those families lived in mobile homes. But some tried to build and go back, but after hearing all of the news, that they all left. There was nothing there. All of those homes are now buried in a mountain. I watched as they bulldozed my home. I think Frank may have a picture of my home as it was bulldozed.
Group of us right now outside of the area, myself, Steve Mellon, and a couple of others, we watched what was going on and realized somebody had to come help these folks and work with them. And if you want to know what to do and what you can do to help yourself and help your community, I want to sum up with a couple of things here. Number one, if you listen to what the speakers were saying, information and getting the truth out is one of the main ways we're going to change this reality for you. Getting the truth out means two things. One, letting us know what you're going through so we can let the powers that be know what you're going through. Ashley's survey is critical. Amassing that information about what you're going through, because the argument is you're not going through anything. You're all just faking it. That's the argument. We know that's not true. We need to let them know we know it's not true. And number two, we ain't going away. Information is key. We need, George did a presentation. His presentation is about 40 minutes. We have that presentation online, just like you saw him narrated here with the slides. We can send that to you, and you can show that to your neighbors, show that to your family, show that to your school, etc., etc. Keep the pressure up, and the only thing that keeps the pressure up is the truth. That's what's going to change the reality. Number two, we've established some mechanisms to try to help people, because there's a lawsuit filed, but the lawsuit's going to take 3 years at least. So we got to keep people alive and as healthy as we can for the next 3 years. So what we did is myself, Robin Lesko, who is the sister you met in the back when you came in that greeted you, Steve Mellon, Mike Blonick. What we're doing is we set up a nonprofit. The nonprofit is called Ohio Valley Derailment Mutual Aid. And what we're doing is we're collecting money specifically to get to people that need help now. I don't care if it's help with medical co-pays, help with getting your electricity and gas going in your places where you live, help with getting a job, whatever you need. We have a survey, and it's called a needs survey. We can send that survey to you, and we're going to, because if you put your name on the list back there, we're going to send you the survey. If you got something wrong with you, or you got something you need, let us know. We've already raised over $10,000. We've passed out over $7,000 already. We're going to keep it up. We're not only going to keep it up, but we're going to raise enough money to get you relocated and get you evacuated out of this place. That's our goal. And I want to say one other thing. There's a lie being spread around this community that those of us that are doing this, myself, George, Steve Mellon, etc., that we're somehow getting big bucks behind the scenes or some nonsense like that. I read today on Facebook. I want to make this clear. We, and myself included, have not and will not take 1 penny. 1 penny. Everything's going to go to you. The nonprofit we set up doesn't have a middle person, doesn't have a bureaucrat running it. It's me. And all I'm doing is the money's coming in and the money's going right back out to people who need it. We passed out over $6,000 already, and we're going to continue doing it. So.